The Kumarasambhava and its author, Kalidasa, are well known in India, and are usually considered the standard of quality in Sanskrit literature. In the hopes of sharing Hinduism's great heritage with the world, let us see now if we can understand this great work. Firstly, the Kumarasambhava is a poem. That is how we can categorize it. The classification of where it belongs in literature genre is called a Mahakavya, which usually describes in beautiful detail and in glamour the lives of heroes and gods. It is labeled as epic because of its important subject matter. Where the Kumarasambhava differs from the other epic glamorizations is in two aspects. It is sensual and it is mystical. This is a fundamental difference, especially since the sensual and the mystical are linked together in the text. The important element to grasp in Indian literature is what is called Rasa, or the taste. It is a prolonged emotional state that captivates the audience. Different parts of the Kumarasambhava capture different tastes, such as the erotic, the heroic, the pathetic, and so on. How can we understand the Kumarasambhava even if we don't know Sanskrit or are not very familiar with Hinduism? Starting with the title, it means the birth of Kumara, who is Kartikeya, the son of Parvati and Shiva. But the poem does not mention Kartikeya, nor does it describe his birth at all. Some poets, after Kalidasa, working on a clever suggestion of what will follow the union, they wrote additional parts for the poem to complete what was only hinted at by Kalidasa. Rather, the poem describes the world as it is in some distant time in the past, and how that description is relevant to the union of Shiva and Parvati. The goal of Kalidasa is to show why the union of Shiva and Parvati is necessary for all of humanity's benefit. The Kumarasambhava is lyric and epic poetry. The verses are expressions and emotions, but discussing grand themes like the birth of gods and great battles. An important aspect of all of Kalidasa's poetry is presence. He calls attention to the presence of place by describing locations all over India in instantly recognizable detail. He calls attention to the actions and gestures of people. He calls attention to the feelings of his characters. Everything that exists has a presence, and it is because we don't pay attention to this presence that we find ourselves out of place. The frame narrative is one where a demon king, Tarakasura, has conquered the universe and has subjected all beings to slavery and humiliation, including the gods. It is this story that needs to be understood so that the Kumarasambhava itself can be understood. This background story represents the force of opposition, represented by the Demon King, which makes people see each other as enemies that need to be defeated and destroyed. In this harsh world, everyone is unsettled, suspicious, and hostile to each other. As a result, those who are the enemies must be defeated and humiliated. It is only a matter of time that everyone is eventually defeated and loses everything they hold dear, from valued objects to endearing relationships. This hopeless world makes life unbearable and can lead to negative states of mind. This background story leads to the main story of the poem, that of Parvati uniting with Shiva. In the main story, Parvati is devoted to Shiva, whom she prays to, but he remains distant. The gods, who are the forces of order, need the future son of Parvati and Shiva to lead their armies against the demon king and hopefully to defeat him. In wanting to defeat Tarakasura, the gods are still within the force of opposition. So as part of the gods' plan, they force Shiva to look at Parvati so that he can fall in love with her. But as he awakens, it seems he turns away from her. She perceives this as a humiliating rejection, and as a result, she sees the world as deceitful and filled with heartbreak. She goes through a period of asceticism, trying to find Shiva by renouncing everything in the world. Everything is a lie and hides pain behind pleasure. Where is God in this painful and deceitful world? How can we find Him, who alone is the truth? The ideas of the poem come from Shaktism, which is an ideology dedicated to the goddess as the supreme being. Shaivism, which is an ideology dedicated to Shiva, will also recognize many themes, such as having a teacher who will guide a person through the mystical journey, and the first teacher of all mystics is Shiva. Ultimately, though, the main ideas come from Shaktism, which has a prominent place for Shiva, but not more important than Parvati herself. In Shaktism, what we find is that existence, with all its pain, suffering, joy, and pleasure, are all variations of the goddess herself. We are also a variation of the goddess, and so are our enemies. So this idea right away makes the forces of opposition to be seen in a different perspective. The forces of opposition, of attraction, and of order are all aspects of existence, which is itself an aspect of Adi Shakti, the divine energy that is represented as the goddess. The solution to living in a hostile world full of opposition lies within us. We need to transform ourselves to actualize our potential. We must become better versions of ourselves. That is how we can overcome the force of opposition, and then extend this peace and harmony so we can ourselves alter all the oppositions of the world, to make them fall back into harmony and order. To achieve this, we need a guide, and this guide is ultimately Shiva, who is the supreme consciousness that shapes the divine energy, and who is also an aspect of the divine energy, and this is eternal in its truth. Shiva is consciousness, and Parvati is energy. The world is consciousness and energy. Shiva then is Parvati herself, and Parvati is Shiva himself. We are witnesses of this love story of Shiva and Parvati, and within us, as we are confronted by a world of oppositions, as we understand that love story, we can understand our need for divine guidance to reach our potential. The union of Parvati and Shiva in ourselves mirrors their union that shapes existence, and this goes on forever and ever. So now we will continue to analyze these themes as we explore one part of the story, one part of the poem, one chapter at a time.